welcome back to the 21 Boom Guided Meditation Series. I will be your guide. This is Coach Feeney, and let's begin this session with eyes open and just gaze into space. Keep your gaze very wide. You can be aware of your body, breath, and sound, but see if you can privilege your gaze here. And as you stare into space, whether you see objects or just a cloudless sky or a blank wall, it doesn't matter. Gently look for yourself. Look for the one who is looking. Look for the one who is in relationship to what is seen. Is there really a relationship? Is there a duality between seer and seen? Look for the seer and then rest your mind. And when I say look for the seer, I mean to do it suddenly, briefly, instantaneously. This is not a protracted effort. This is not a matter of going deep within. Just turn attention upon itself and see how things seem. Do it in the space of a finger snap. Use this sound to focus your awareness. How does consciousness seem the moment you hear this sound? And look for the center of consciousness. If you find yourself getting frustrated, notice that that is simply a complex of thoughts and reactions. Suddenly become mindful of that. That's as good as an object of meditation as anything. And then leave your mind wide open. The moment you notice you are lost in thought, look for the thinker and notice what happens to the present thought. Okay, now let's transition and let's do the most basic practice of mindfulness. Simply close your eyes and pay attention to the breath. Feel it wherever it's most distinct, at the nose, or the chest, or the abdomen. Pick one spot and let awareness settle there. And whatever else you notice, other sensations or sounds, thoughts, let all of that go and bring your attention back to the breath. The moment you notice your mind has been captured by thoughts, look at the thought itself. Where is it? What is it? How does it have any power at all? And then come back to the breath. See if you can make your attention even more precise. Don't let anything about the character of the breath escape your notice. If you find yourself subtly anticipating the breath, just drop back and receive it. Your job is not to be like a cat waiting for a mouse to emerge from its hole. Just be like a mirror, in which everything appears effortlessly. In the final minute of the session, begin again, as though this were the first moments you've ever paid attention. Keep your attention on the breath, but let your mind expand to include all the sensations in your body. Just let consciousness reflect the full changing cloud of sensation. once again, I've introduced this practice of looking for the center of consciousness, looking for the subject, looking for the self. And that will keep coming up, but I do this with the awareness that I'm really talking to two sets of people, always. There are those for whom an exercise of that sort has worked, and you can actually notice what consciousness is like prior to the sense of subject-object perception. And then I know that there are many people for whom this is still an inscrutable instruction. How to do it, what is it that I'm actually asking you to do? If you find yourself in that second group, just know that if you persist, if you increase your ability to pay attention, there's something that you will discover in this space, right on the surface of awareness. And please don't get discouraged. There are many benefits of meditation that come without being able to recognize the intrinsic selflessness of consciousness. In fact, all of the literature you've heard about meditation benefits, the benefits of mindfulness, has been produced based on the study of subjects who very likely haven't recognized this about the nature of consciousness. So general mindfulness isn't good for you, and you have been practicing that, so general mindfulness is good for you, and you have been practicing that. But there's this core insight which is really the purpose of mindfulness, and I'll keep doing whatever I can to point you back to it. Whether you're new to meditation or have been practicing for years, the purpose of all of this was to give everyone the same tools. Of course, what you choose to do now, how you integrate this practice in your life, will determine what you ultimately get from it. As you continue down this path, remember that the goal of meditation is not to become a meditator, not even a good one. The goal is to recognize how the mind always already is, and to experience the freedom that is inherent to the nature of consciousness. Freedom from fear and shame and envy and craving. Freedom from self. Now perhaps you've tasted that at some point in the course of these meditations, and perhaps you haven't yet. In either case, you now have all the tools you need to keep exploring. And I can only encourage you to do that until there really is no distinction between your practice and your life. Some of you may practice less frequently or use these meditations in tandem with some other method. I'll just say that in my experience, very few people outgrow the benefit of using guided meditations. I certainly haven't. I mean, it seems silly, but even listening to my own meditations in the process of editing them is helpful to me. A guided meditation, even if you've created it, functions like a mindfulness alarm that keeps you more focused than you would otherwise be. These meditations are designed with two principles in mind. There's a theory section for you to learn and relearn the concepts, and a practice section for you to deepen your direct experience of the nature of mind. And it's really through both theory and practice that I think each of us live a more examined life. As you know, the content of these meditations continues to expand and change. I'm adding new lessons and continuing to add conversations with others. Again, I'm doing the practice along with you and continually searching for new resources and other ways of thinking that are useful. So I really can't tell you what these meditations will look like in a year. All I can say is whatever is here, whether it's been created by me or perhaps maybe even someone else, it will be here because I think you'll find value in it. However, these sessions will never become a content farm. It's not just about listening to each new lesson or conversation once and then waiting for the next one to appear. My hope is that this content will be useful to you as a tool which you can pick up again and again. This is the place where I'm putting the most important things I've ever learned. And these are insights and experiences to which I feel immense gratitude. So please feel free to return to lessons and conversations you've already listened to. You might hear something new in them each time. And once again, thank you for the effort you've put in here. It really is meaningful, and it's a great pleasure and an honor to be practicing with you. I would like to take a few minutes to clarify the concept of mindfulness because I and many other people use this term in a variety of ways. We can use it to describe a state of mind, or a property of the mind, or a kind of action, a behavior, and needless to say, a type of meditation practice. And it's easily conflated with other terms like meditation or concentration, attention, awareness, consciousness, focus, cognition, perception, and it's also entangled with many other attributes like tranquility and insight and wisdom and awakening, being in the present moment. So there's kind of a word cloud of associations here. First, we should recognize that people use these terms slightly differently depending on the context. So, awareness is often a synonym for consciousness, but it can also be a synonym for mindfulness. There's a basic distinction between mindfulness and its antithesis, which is something like mindlessness, distraction, and a lack of awareness. Mindfulness is a translation of a Pali term, sati, which even in Pali is an overloaded term. It can also mean remembering or recollecting. And so it doesn't always refer to a non-conceptual direct awareness of the contents of consciousness. It can mean recalling one's priorities. The fact that awakening might be a value that supersedes others or behaving ethically might, reflecting on that, deciding that certain types of thoughts are not worth indulging. That is also considered within Buddhist teaching a kind of coarse grain mindfulness. Again, it's generally speaking an awareness of what one is paying attention to moment by moment. Attention is its own thing. Attention is like a spotlight within a larger field of consciousness. So there's a total field of what you can possibly be aware of in this moment. There's sight, sounds, and sensations, thoughts and emotions appearing on their own, and you can decide, it would seem, to pay attention to something in that focus. That's what we mean by attention. Before you learned anything about mindfulness or meditation, you were still paying attention to something more or less every waking moment. So attention bounces around to the objects of perception and cognition, and it's impressively colored by various mental states of liking and not liking the character of experience. And so it's this ordinary hardware of attention that we begin to train in mindfulness practice. And in the beginning, strategically place attention on various objects like the breath or sounds. And the training immediately becomes one of noticing the distinction between being lost in thought, having one's attention diverted from the chosen object of meditation into thought, and the opposite of that, which is to successfully place attention on the breath or any other object. So it's this repeated placing of attention that is the initial training, and that is in fact training in what is called concentration within the Buddhist teachings. Samatha or shamatha in Pali and Sanskrit. Concentration and mindfulness are not the same, but you need a certain degree of concentration to successfully practice mindfulness. You can take this concentration practice further. You can place attention on a single object, whether the breath or the mental state of loving kindness in metta practice, or any object in your visual field. It literally can be anything. You can place attention on a single object so successfully that the character of your conscious experience begins to radically change. Thoughts no longer arise, and very positive emotions of rapture and bliss begin to flood the mind. It becomes incredibly pleasurable to have a concentrated mind, and there's a whole stream of practice in various contemplative traditions around becoming a kind of athlete of concentration. And of course, concentration is a wonderfully useful property for the mind to have in any other area of life. To be able to concentrate in one's work or when playing a sport, this is a very good thing to be able to do. And you need some significant concentration to be able to practice mindfulness successfully. But fairly early on in the practice, one no longer attempts to focus on one object to the exclusion of anything else. One simply wants a kind of momentary concentration which enables you to notice whatever, in fact, you do notice. So your attention can flit from object to object, and as long as you are clearly perceiving those objects, sights, sounds, sensations, thoughts, well then that is the successful application of mindfulness. But again, it's attention that is not colored by grasping or aversion. You're merely accepting what is arising within open and curious and clear seeing, right? So it does have an attitude, or at least has a marketed absence of certain other attitudes like fear and craving. It's a balanced kind of attention. And in the context of this course, I tend to think about mindfulness in two stages. And the first is what I sometimes call ordinary or conventional or dualist mindfulness. And this is the mindfulness that almost everyone starts with. It's the mindfulness you practice when the feeling of self is one's starting point. There's a feeling that there is a subject that can direct attention, a meditator, a thinker of thoughts, and even with that dualism in place, there can be a profound distinction between being mindful and being distracted. There are all those moments where you've forgotten that you're even supposed to be meditating, and then there are those moments where you return attention to the breath, or to sounds, or to anything else that's appearing in consciousness. And it's that fluctuation between being lost in thought and being clearly aware of something that is the practice of mindfulness. And this first stage itself can be divided into two stages, or at least mindfulness at this stage can have two characters. There can be a very deliberate form of mindfulness and a spontaneous form, right? You can feel like something you're doing, or it can feel like something that's happening naturally. It can be effortful, or it can be effortless. It can be fabricated. It really seems like it's a kind of mental behavior or a gesture. Or it can be unfabricated. It can seem a kind of natural property of consciousness. And so with practice, even dualistic mindfulness with a sense of subject-object perception still preserved, that can begin to feel more spontaneous, more effortless, less like you're doing anything at all when you meditate. And then there's a second stage, which I often indicate in various ways in these meditations, and that's the stage at which the illusion of self gets cut through, or the sense that there's a subject at the center of consciousness falls away. And that experience of openness and centerlessness at that point becomes synonymous with mindfulness, which is to say that when you're truly paying attention to anything, what is clear in those moments is that there's no one doing it. Everything is simply happening. Everything is arising on its own, thoughts, intentions, emotions, and vanishing. And this prior condition of consciousness in which all of that is happening doesn't itself feel like I. It doesn't feel like a self. And so in that context, one speaks and thinks less about mindfulness as a kind of behavior or practice or even a state of mind, and one tends to speak more about the nature of consciousness itself. And this is where other terms begin to seem relevant. One talks about insight or wisdom or awakening, right? It's the thing that's being realized by the successful application of mindfulness. So what's there to be seen, or the illusions that are cut through? And to close here, maybe I'll take a minute to build this up experientially. So if your eyes are closed at this moment, open them and pick an object in your visual field and focus on it. So now you're trying to narrow your attention to a single object, and you can see it clearly, presumably. I'm looking at an icon on the desktop of my computer, and it's right in the center of my visual field. It is more in focus than anything else that I can see. But the first thing to notice here is that it's not the only thing I see. I'm trying to look at it to the exclusion of everything else. But I also notice that there's more to my visual field than the single icon. So the rest of my visual field is also appearing in consciousness, but my attention is aimed at a single object of perception. Okay, so here we can differentiate attention from awareness or consciousness. And it's from this wider field of consciousness that something might intrude, something might capture my attention and pull it away from the object that I'm focusing on. Now, mindfulness here is just the clear seeing of all of this, right? I'm aware of my focus on this object. I'm also aware of my wider experience. And I'm aware of the precariousness of this. I'm aware that thoughts are buffeting my attention, threatening to pull me away. I'm also aware of other perceptions, sensations in my body, sounds. Now, insofar as all of this is clear and unencumbered by a reaction, insofar as I'm not grasping at what's pleasant here or pushing what's unpleasant away, that is mindfulness. The moment-to-moment tracking of the character of my experience. Now again, if I got more and more concentrated on the object of my attention, this icon on my desktop, then my perception will begin to change. The rest of my visual field could fade away entirely, and my sense of having a body could also fade away, and thoughts could cease to arise, and that could be a very pleasant drug-like experience. And that's what many people mean by meditation, the attainment of that kind of one-pointedness. But that's not mindfulness practice or insight practice. Vipassana is the Pali word for insight. That's not what's considered wisdom practice within the Buddhist tradition. Rather, the goal of wisdom is to use a sufficient degree of a concentration to notice things about the nature of mind in general. So again, I'm looking at this icon on the screen of my computer, and now I can shift to looking at my visual field as a whole. Now I'm not trying to narrow my visual attention. Rather, I'm trying to take in the entire scene, even the periphery, as a single continuum of color and shadow. This is what I refer to in various practice sessions as leaving your attention very wide. So widening your visual perception to include the entire field. Now I'm still focused on seeing, but my experience has a slightly different character. There's no narrowing of focus, and again, the conventional practice of mindfulness here will tend to still presume that there's a one who is seeing, that there's a meditator. It will still feel like attention, however wide, is on one side of this experience of seeing. I'm over here behind my eyes, looking out at an expanse of color and shadow. But the second stage of mindfulness is achieved when you look for that seat of attention, or you look for your head, to put it into the frame that Douglas Harding used, in which you could find Richard Lang exploring in his track on, and in failing to find that center to awareness and failing to find it conclusively, so that you have the experience of the center being absent. There's an experience of open awareness that eventually becomes synonymous with one's mindfulness, and this is where I tend to talk about non-dual or non-dualistic mindfulness. But again, at every stage, and even in the very beginning, mindfulness is the antithesis and the antidote for distraction and identification with thought. It is the thing that breaks the spell and returns us to direct awareness of what's appearing in the present. So I hope that was helpful. Again, many of these terms can be loosely defined and used with slightly different shadings of meaning in various contexts, but hopefully this gives you some clarification of how I use these in these meditations. So also, take a moment to recognize where you are. I don't mean your physical location in space, I mean your starting point with respect to experience in this moment. For instance, notice what it's like to see. You have this field of color and shadow, and it's appearing to all on its own. You don't have to make it appear, you don't have to do anything to see, and so it is with hearing and sensations in your body. Sights, sounds, sensations, emotions, thoughts, everything is simply appearing on its own. Who or what is doing the knowing? As a matter of experience, simply notice everything that appears. Every sign that you have a body, every sign that that body is in a world, it all must first appear in consciousness to be noticed. Are you producing consciousness? What is this condition? What is this open space? Does it have a center? Are you in the center? Are you on the edge of it? Is there any part of this field of appearances that you are controlling? Are you producing the next sound or sensation or thoughts or intention? Decide to move one of your hands and move it. Can you account for why you didn't decide to move the other one? Are the sensations of movement something that you're bringing into being? Is there anything that you are doing to notice them? Or do they simply appear in consciousness all on their own? Where is the one who is being aware of these phenomena? Look at your hands. The hands you see are appearances in consciousness. This world you see with your open eyes is the same place your mind is. It's the same place where thoughts and sensations and moods are appearing. As a matter of experience, none of this is outside what you are. In neurological terms, what you see here with your open eyes is what your brain is doing. So where are you in all of this? Are you behind your face? Or is your face and your hands and the world appearing in the same condition? What is this open space, and what does it feel like? Is there anyone or anything in the center of this? Is there a center, or is everything simply appearing in its own place? Consider a thought. Perhaps you're thinking, well, what is he talking about? Where did the thought itself come from? And where does it go? And how does it seem to define what you are the moment it arises? What is aware of thoughts? And what does it feel like in itself? Does it feel like I, or is that merely what it feels like to be lost in and identified with the next thought? If everything is simply arising in this open space and appearing and being known all on its own, where are you in all of this?